Could it be that at moments of special crisis during the movie, when the slime spots Charles, for instance, Charles loses hold of reality and momentarily takes the slime to be real and really fears it? These moments are too short for Charles to think about doing anything, so one might claim it is not surprising that his belief and fear are not accompanied by the normal inclinations to act. This move isn't convincing. In the first place, Charles' quasi-fear responses are not merely momentary. He may have his heart in his throat throughout most of the movie, yet without experiencing the slightest inclination to flee or call the police. These long-term responses and Charles' propensity to describe them afterwards in terms of fear would need to be understood even if it were allowed that moments of real fear are interspersed among them. Furthermore, however tempting the momentary fear idea might be, comparable views of other psychological states are much less appealing. When we say that someone pities Willy Loman or admires Superman, it is unlikely that we have in mind special moments during her experience of the work when she forgets momentarily that she is dealing with mere fiction and feels flashes of actual pity or admiration. Her sense of reality may be robust and healthy throughout the experience, uninterrupted by anything like the special moments of crisis Charles experiences during the horror movie. Indeed, it may be appropriate to say that someone pities Willy or admires Superman even when she is not watching the play or reading the cartoon. The momentary fear theory, even if it were plausible, would not help us with cases in which one apparently has other psychological attitudes toward fictions. Let's look at challenges to the supposition that fear necessarily involves a judgment of danger and that emotions in general have cognitive dimensions. Is it possible that Charles fears the slime even without taking himself to be endangered by it? Charles' case and others like it are themselves thought by some to show the independence of fear and other emotions from beliefs, but the treatment of these cases is often distressingly question begging. I have in mind some, not all, of the recent literature narrowly focused on Charles' fear and on the experience of being moved by Anna Karenina. The reader can trace much of it back through the references in high slop emotions in fictional characters and more real, enjoying negative emotions in fiction. Charles is afraid, it is assumed, and he does not think he is in danger. So fear does not require such a belief. One then cooks up a weaker requirement so as to protect the initial assumption. Fear requires only imagining danger, it is said, or the idea of danger vividly presented. The fuzziness of the line between imagining and believing adds to the confusion. The question begging rests implicitly, no doubt, on an assumption that taking Charles to fear the slime, as he says he does, is the natural or ordinary or common sense or pre-theoretically more plausible position, and that it wins by default or at least is to be preferred in the absence of substantial reasons to the contrary. This assumption is unwarranted. One will understandably hesitate to second-guess Charles' assessment of his own psychological condition. But the nature of his assessment is by no means self-evident, and is itself part of what is at issue. To take him literally and straightforwardly when he testifies to being afraid of the slime is dangerously presumptive. His saying this no more establishes that he thinks he is afraid than the fact that children playing a game of make-believe say there is a monster in the basement shows them to believe that a monster is in the basement. If asked whether he has had any really terrifying experiences in the last decade, Charles might well omit mention of his confrontation with the slime, or he might cite it in a parenthetical spirit as though it does not really count. Well, only in watching in a movie. Initial intuitions are not all on one side, and neither side bears disproportionately the burden of proof. Patricia Greenspan has undertaken a more substantial reconsideration of standard views about links between emotions and beliefs. Emotions as evaluations, see also quote, feelings in context. Frances, let's suppose, was once attacked by a rabid dog. As a result of this traumatic experience, she exhibits fear in the presence of all dogs, including lovable old Fido, even though she knows full well that Fido, or Fido, has had his rabies shots and is practically toothless anyway. Francis genuinely fears Fido, Greenspan suggests, as Aaron fears flying, and she avoids the dog when she can. But it is awkward to attribute to her the belief that Fido is dangerous. For one thing, she is perfectly happy to allow friends and loved ones to play with him. Does she judge Fido to be dangerous to her but not to anyone else? Perhaps Aaron too fears without thinking himself endangered. Part of the problem is that the notion of belief or judgment is far from clear. It may even be that beliefs do not it may even be that beliefs do not constitute natural kind, that no refinement of the ordinary notion has a legitimate place in a sophisticated theory of mind. If so, the question of whether emotions require beliefs will be ill-formed. Greenspan holds that emotions do require appropriate evaluations of their objects' pro or con attitudes. Perhaps Charles lacks an attitude or evaluation necessary for fearing the slime, but these notions are not dearer than that of belief. But we do not have to settle these larger issues in order to diagnose Charles' condition. Even if Francis fears in the absence of a belief in danger, this hardly suggests that Charles does. Francis exhibits deliberate behavior characteristic of fear, while Charles, we saw, not only does not, but has not even the slightest tendency to. Frances gives in to her immediate urge to sidestep any unnecessary encounters with Fido. She flees when Fido approaches, out of fear. Crott, who argues that emotions do not require beliefs, appears also to allow action a role in their analysis, in feelings in context. Fear is motivating in distinctive ways, whether or not its motivational force is attributed to cognitive elements in it. It puts pressure on one's behavior, even if one resists. If skydivers and mountain climbers enjoy fear, not just danger, they nevertheless have inclinations to avoid the danger. To deny this, to insist on considering Charles' non motivating state to be one of fear of the slime, would be radically to reconceive the notion of fear. Fear emasculated by subtracting its distinctive motivational force is not fear at all. The issue is not just one of fidelity to a deeply ingrained pre-theoretical conception of fear. The perspicuity of our understanding of human nature is at stake. The fear experienced by Charles, whose munching of popcorn is interrupted by a wave of quasi-fear sensations, and that experienced by Francis, who flees from Fido, or Aaron, who, with his teeth gritted in determination, manages to go through with an airplane flight, are animals of different kinds. To assimilate them would be to emphasize superficial similarities at the expense of fundamental differences. A creditor might as well accept payment in fool's gold. Lamarck, How Can We Fear and Pity Fictions, points out that a condition like that Charles is in may be motivating in certain ways. Some viewers bury their faces in their hands or even flee the theater rather than face the horrors on screen. But this behavior is easily explained by a fear of the depiction or of experiencing it, or merely by a prediction that one will find the experience unpleasant. In any case, it is clear that viewers often do not behave in these ways or have any inclination to, even when they are said to be afraid of the slime. We will do better to assimilate genuine fear and genuine emotions generally to belief desire complexes. This does not imply that emotions are not feelings. If fear does not consist partly in a belief that one is in danger, it is nevertheless similar to such a belief, combined with the desire not to be harmed in its motivational force, and perhaps in other ways as well. My claim is not that Charles experiences no genuine fear. He does not fear the slime, but the movie might induce in him fear of something else. If Charles is a child, he may wonder whether there might not be real slimes or other exotic horrors like the one in the movie, even though he fully realizes that the movie slime itself is not real. He may genuinely fear these suspected actual dangers. He may have nightmares about them for days afterwards, and he may take steps to avoid them. Jaws caused a lot of people to fear sharks, ones they thought might really exist, and to avoid swimming in the ocean. But this does not mean they were afraid of the fictional sharks in the movie. If Charles is an older moviegoer with a heart condition, he may be afraid of the movie itself or of experiencing it. Perhaps he knows that excitement could trigger a heart attack. and feels that the movie will cause excitement by depicting the slime as being especially aggressive or threatening. This is real fear, but it is fear of the depiction of the slime, not of the slime depicted. Good distinction. Several commentators willing to agree that Charles does not fear the slime have tried to understand his experience as one of actual fear with a different object. Peter Lamarck takes him to fear the thought of the slime or the sense of a description of it. Of course, the thought may well be a cause of one's fear, even if it is not its object. See also Clark, Fictional Entities, Manison, On Being Moved by Fiction, Novitz, Fiction, Imagination and Emotion, Skolsky, On Being Moved by Fiction. That he might fear this thought or the experience of thinking it is evident. The Charles with a heart condition does. But Lamarck does not have in mind such special circumstances. What we call fear of the slime by ordinary appreciators, fully aware of its viciousness, is in general, he thinks, fear of the thought. I see no advantage in this suggestion. The reasons for denying that Charles fears the slime apply equally to the thought. Apart from special circumstances, as when he has a heart condition, he does not consider the thought dangerous or treat it as such, nor does he experience even an inclination to escape from it. Moreover, his experience simply does not feel like fear of a thought, characterizing it as such flies in the face of its phenomenology. And it is the slime, not a thought, that Charles so inevitably and unabashedly describes himself as afraid of. The original intuition, for what it's worth, is that the slime is the object of Charles' fear. Lamarck's proposal abandons that intuition and also fails to recognize our reasons for denying it. We will understand Charles' experience in a way that does full justice to its phenomenology and accommodates easily the normal ways of describing it, yet does not have him literally fearing the slime or necessarily anything at all. If I am right about Charles, skepticism concerning other psychological altitudes purportedly aimed at fictitious objects is in order as well. We should be wary of the idea that people literally pity Willy Lemon or grieve for Anna Karenina or admire Superman while being fully aware that these characters and their sufferings or exploits are purely fictitious. It is not implausible that pity involves a belief or judgment or attitude, that what one pities actually suffers misfortune and admiration and belief that the admired object is admirable. But the normal appreciator does not think it is actually the case that Willy suffers or that Superman is admirable. Perhaps it is more reasonable to think of these emotions as merely akin to such beliefs, together with appropriate desires, in particular in their motivational force. But the spectator who pities Willy, especially, would seem not to feel the motivational force in question. She feels no inclination to commiserate with him or to try to help him. It is less clear what one must believe about someone in order to grieve for him, or what motivational force may be intrinsic to grief. But grief, as well as pity and admiration, would seem to require at the very least awareness of the existence of their objects. It is arguable that for this reason alone appreciators cannot be said actually to pity Willy or grieve for Anna or admire Superman. People just seem to fear things of whose existence they are doubtful, such as a tornado that might occur. What is called fear of a possible tornado might better be thought of as fear that there will be a tornado, that is, as dedictor rather than dere fear, together with imagined dere fear. Like the slime movie, Death of a Salesman, Anna Karenina, and Superman comics may induce in appreciators genuine emotions of the kind in question. Anna Karenina fosters genuine sympathy for real people in unfortunate situations like Anna's. This is part of what is important about Tolstoy's novel. But to consider the experience commonly characterized as pity for Anna to be merely pity for real people like her, or a determination or inclination conditionally to feel pity toward people in like situations, does not do it justice. With or grieving for Anna. A call for skepticism is no place to stop. We need a positive account of appreciators' experiences, a well-articulated alternative to literal-minded acceptance of ordinary claims that they pity Willy, grieve for Anna, fear the slime, and so on. This I will provide in 7.1. The success of the alternative will bolster the grounds for skepticism, but it is more than evident already that the legitimacy of such literal madness mindedness is not to be taken for granted. This I'll quote. Fictionality and other intentional properties. I prefer to exist in comic strip form rather than in real life because my chances for happiness are greater. Woody Allen. Our difficulties in trying to sort out the ways in which fictional worlds and the real world are and are not connected demonstrate the inadequacy of the theoretical tools I have utilized so far. I have brought into play the notion of fictionality, distinguishing the question of whether it is fictional that Henry saves the heroine or Charles fears the slime from that of whether it is true. But I have considered only fictionality in work worlds, not fictionality in games of make-believe. And I have not made use of the account of fictionality developed in Chapter 1. So far in this chapter, fictionality has been thought of simply as a property of propositions, as analogous to being believed or desired, or hoped for, or denied. 2 seconds. The comparison of fictionality with such other intentional properties accords nicely with our feeling of physical isolation from fictional worlds. We cannot kiss or kick or save something that is believed or wished or said or denied to exist but does not. Neither can we interact in any of these ways with something that exists only fictionally. The comparison also bears out my contention that we do not fear or envy or worry about characters whom we know to be merely fictional. If it is believed by someone that an assassin is after me, and I know for sure that nothing of the sort is true, we do not suppose that I might nevertheless be afraid of the believed to exist assassin. I can hardly envy a wished for rich uncle, realizing that he is only wished for. If it is asserted or denied that there is someone on top of Mount Everest with acute appendicitis, and I know that there is not, I will not and cannot worry about this non-actual person or feel sorry for him. But the comparison of fictionality with being believed or desired or claimed fails entirely to bring out the disconcerting difference that seems to obtain between physical relations across worlds and psychological ones, the impression we have, even if it is illusory, that things known to be merely fictional are objects of our psychological latitudes. Why isn't it even tempting to think that we might pity a claim to exist mountaineer with appendicitis without believing in him ourselves? Why don't we find ourselves in states that are at least very like pity, or describe ourselves as feeling sympathy when we contemplate such claims? Perhaps occasionally we do, when we imagine with a certain vivacity the claims to be true. This takes us back to fictionality. It is clear that there is something special about fictionality, as contrasted with other intentional properties. The observation that we have a strong inclination to think of fictionality as a species of truth, even though we know better, sums it up. We somehow regard what only fictionally exists as being real, and what only fictionally occurs as actually taking place, whereas we comfortably take what is merely believed or desired or said to exist or occur to be just that. The psychological bond we feel to fictions is a dramatic symptom of this inclination, but there are others. One is the simple propensity to speak of fictional worlds. The notion that fictions belong to worlds different from ours does, to be sure, reflect a conception of them as distant from us. But why do we think of fictions as belonging to worlds at all, as though they have a place or places somewhere in reality, however remote they may be from the actual world? It is significant that there are no very comfortable analogues of the notion of fictional worlds corresponding to most other intentional operators. If a novel makes it fictional that someone attends his own funeral, we are likely to express this by saying that in the world of the novel, someone does attend his own funeral. But if Jones claims to be a genius, we are not likely to say that he is a genius in the world of his claims. And we rarely, if ever, speak of some things being the case in the world of someone's wishes or belief or denial. What fictionally is the case is naturally thought of as being the case in a special realm, a world, in a way in which what is claimed or believed or desired to be the case is not. Some philosophers have found it convenient to introduce notions of belief worlds, perceptual worlds, and so on. But these worlds, however useful they may be for technical purposes, do not capture the imagination in the way that fictional worlds do. This fact needs to be explained. The ordinary conception of fictional worlds, worlds different from the real one but worlds nevertheless, is a device to paper over our confusion about whether or not mere fictions are real. Our conception of fictional worlds and our propensity to think of them as parts of reality are what give rise to worries about how Lady Macbeth can have children without having a definite number of them, or how it can be utterly impossible for us to discover how many she has. It is hard to imagine taking seriously analogous puzzles about what is said or believed or wished for. We may think that someone has children without having any idea how many she has. A person may wish to have children without wishing specifically for some definite number of them. There is no puzzle here. The incompleteness of worlds, shall we say, or belief, desire, and so on, is not even noteworthy. Why is it puzzling that fictionally Lady Macbeth has children without its being fictional that she has two, or that she has three, or more, or fewer? Because we think of fictionality as a kind of truth. If it is true that someone has children, it must be true of some definite number that that is the number of her children. Often we do not even bother to mention explicitly that the world in which something is the case is a fictional one. We talk about what is fictional as though it is true in the real world, as though it actually is the case. Instead of saying, in the world of Defoe's novel, Robinson Crusoe survived a shipwreck, or in the novel, Crusoe survived shipwreck, we are likely to say just Robinson Crusoe survived a shipwreck. In the novel, and other colloquial fictional operators are commonly and comfortably omitted when there is no danger of misunderstanding. This practice might be dismissed as nothing more than a shortcut to speed conversation were it not that we rarely take similar shortcuts with other intentional operators. Phrases such as, it is believed that, it is wished that, Jones wishes that, are not often left implicit. Even when it is clearly understood that one is speaking about Jones' wishes, it would be peculiar at best to say merely, a golden mountain will appear on the horizon, meaning that Jones wishes that a golden mountain would appear on the horizon. Occasionally it is believed that, or he says that, is omitted, but only in very special circumstances, ones that plausibly involve fictionality. I know of no ordinary situations in which one might say, Smith robbed the bank, as an abbreviation for it is denied, or it is denied by Jones that Smith robbed the bank. Any doubts about the significance of this disanalogous treatment of fictional and other operators vanish in light of a related but even more striking peculiarity of German. In German, a sentence or clause P is ordinarily in the indicative mood when the speaker is committing himself to its truth, and in the subjunctive mood when he is not. P is indicative when it is simply asserted and when it occurs in contexts like I know that P, I claim that P, and he knows that P. It is subjunctive in contexts like I wish that P, I doubt that P, it is believed that P, he says that P. But fictional statements are a striking exception. The indicative is used in contexts like in the story P, even though the speaker is not committing himself to the truth of P. The indicative is used also when is omitted but understood. Robinson Crusoe en allemand. Indicative fictional statements obviously cannot be considered elliptical for their subjunctive variants, and not just because they are not shorter. The subjunctive variants are incorrect. When we say Tom Sawyer was lost in a cave, rather than in the story Tom Sawyer was lost in a cave, or a German equivalent using the indicative, we are speaking just as we would if we were referring to an existing person named Tom Sawyer and saying of him that he really was lost in a cave. Theorists are not bound to treat fictional entities in the way colloquial speech does, of course. But we do need to provide an explanation for the strangely persistent inclination to think of fictions as sharing reality with us, which is reflected in colloquial speech. And our feelings of intimacy toward them must somehow be squared with the obvious physical isolation of fictional worlds from the real world. The observation that being fictional is in some ways like being believed or desired or claimed to be the case is inadequate on both counts. It only heightens the mystery. The notions of fiction and reality are a rich source of witticisms, many of them deriving from the seemingly schizophrenic attitude toward fictionality we have been examining. Woody Allen's stated preference for fictional existence is one. In Flann O'Brien's At Swing Two Birds, the writer creates characters for a novel, including one so ravishingly beautiful that he cannot resist ravishing her. She becomes pregnant by him and produces a son, a person of the quasi-illusory sort. Resenting the author's dictatorial control, the bastard son, who inherited his father's literary talents with help from the other characters, turns the tables on the author by writing a story about him in which he is arrested, tortured, charged with various crimes, and put on trial. The joke trades on a deliberate conflation of the notions of fictionality and truth. Altered as follows: I prefer to exist in the world of someone's desires, beliefs, denials, rather than in real life, because my chances for happiness are greater. It falls fired. Deliberately conflating being true with being desired or believed or denied is just silly. It is time to bring to the table more of the results of part one and to develop them further. A proposition is fictional in the world of a work, we recall, just in case there is a prescription that it is to be imagined by appreciators. This brings us, as appreciators, into the picture in a way in which we are not in the case of other people's beliefs and wishes and claims. We are to imagine that Willy Lerman lost his job, that Superman rescues people from tall buildings, and so on. Such imaginings as are part of our games of make believe, games that have their own fictional worlds distinct from work worlds. And these imaginings go with imaginings about ourselves. When we imagine Willie losing his job, we also imagine knowing about it. It is a mistake to think of appreciators as mere spectators of work worlds, observers from the outside of what is fictional in them. That leaves out our participation in games in which representations are props. A close look at the nature of this participation will go a long way toward extricating us from our difficulties. 6. Participation. The actor on a stage plays at being another before a gathering of people who play at taking him for that other person. George Luis Borges, Everything and Nothing. Participation in children's games. Participants in games of make believe need to be distinguished from mere onlookers. A minimal condition for participation in a game is considering oneself constrained to imagine the propositions that are fictional in it. Participants consider the rules or principles of generation to apply to themselves. Onlookers, observing the game from without, do not think of themselves as subject to its rules. The fictionality of a proposition is not taken to be a reason for them to imagine it. They may take great interest in the game, however. They may study it and its props thoroughly, learning what is fictional, which fictional truths imply which others, what principles of generation are operative, and in many ways analyzing and explaining the game and assessing its significance. The roles children play in their games usually go far beyond satisfaction of this minimal condition for participation. Typically, they are themselves props, reflexive ones. They generate fictional truths about themselves. This is an immensely significant feature of children's games, and one we will do well to bear in mind when we think about representational works of art and the games people play with them. Children are almost invariably characters in their games of make believe. The imaginings they engage in are partly about themselves. It is fictional of a child playing dolls or house that he bathes a baby or makes a bed or cooks spaghetti. In a game of cowboys and Indians, it is fictional of some of the participating children that they are cowboys, of others that they are Indians, of all that they ride around on horses and perform assorted heroic deeds. Even when a child pushes a toy truck too small actually to ride in across the floor, it is probably fictional that he is driving it. Plus 220 pages, yes.